No, it's just to say, boy, that I was in the next door. We've got the pharmacy. And I was just popping in quickly during the break, and it was interesting. We're talking about long COVID in the last piece, and there's a big information about long COVID and how to contact and get information about it on the NHS Scotland website. So just to let you know, thanks.
Thanks, Graham. Okay, next item on the agenda, item 8, is the Integrated Performance and Quality Report, Ipqr. And I think this is going to be, again, orchestrated by David. And we have a separate item on finance following the Ipqr item. So over to you, David.
Thanks very much, Chair, and good morning, everyone. The Ipqr has continued to develop. As colleagues will remember, we agreed that two things. Firstly, as Boyd has pointed out, the finance section will be reviewed separately. We thought that was appropriate. As far as the main performance element of the board, then the board has delegated the primary review of that information at its subcommittees across staff governance, clinical governance, and finance and performance. And what we are seeking to do in this cycle and in continuous cycles thereafter is to make sure that the feedback from those subcommittees are then fed back through to the board to give context to the overall dashboard that you can see before us. This is the first cycle of that new regime, and it's still a work in progress, so happy to take feedback as we review it today. As such, I'm not going to go around the houses as we have done previously at this stage in terms of introduction, but I will invite Lorraine to give some highlights from the report before we open up for general questions, and colleagues and chairs of the subcommittees, I'm sure, will come in to support some of those questions. So, Lorraine.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Chair. Yeah, just to draw on some of the challenges that we've got and how we are working on wider indicators to help support. Pam maybe highlighted earlier, we are looking at that surveillance across the system and how we can start to support that within the delayed discharge area. And there's a task force in place to look at that. But we are looking at reprioritising the areas to make sure that we get that maximum benefit and high impact in terms of delayed discharges and how we use that intelligence to evidence success across our system. So there's quite a lot of improvement plans aligned to that in each particular area to support delayed discharge. And we are working on indicators across our IGB and health and social care partnerships in terms of aligning that improvement plan. So working closely with Fiona and Louise in terms of working on that wider area. In terms of ED performance, nationally it's sitting at 77.8%, and as you say, we're definitely doing better than that in Highland. But again, ED will be part of that whole system wider approach and flow navigation centre. Outpatient performance and TTG, they're very similar. We've got a 3-year annual operating plans coming up in terms of having to have that recovery plan for Scottish Government. So we're working, I'm part of the Short Life Working Group that will develop that template for Scottish Government and looking at how we embed the Centre for Sustainable Delivery work and embedding service reviews and comms out, and that will be reviewed monthly by the Performance Board. In terms of cancer, it's a positive area. 31 and 62-day targets are very positive of late. The urology hub's definitely making an impact on that because that was one of the key areas. So that's a really positive area. CAMS we've heard about previously. There's an improvement plan being developed for North Highland. The Minister was happy with Argyll and Butte's development plan. And as part of that North Highland approach, we've developed a target operating model. Recruitment's taken place. We've got weekly meetings embedded and working closely with Highland Council, and engagement with service users will be key moving forward. That's very similar for PT. Improvement plan needs develop new models, working with Louise and Fiona, and really looking at how we explore that for the future delivery. In terms of falls and complaints, that are the two areas that were highlighted by Clinical Governance Committee. There's an improvement plan in place for complaints and for FOIs. And I know that Louise and Fiona have been looking at areas for complaints with COVID or vaccination related queries, because that's been a big impact on complaints. And in falls, Kate's here in place of Heidi, but improvement plans are in place. Just to note that we've got to have a 20% reduction in falls in place by September 2023, and all falls with harm need to reduce by 30% by September 2023. So that's a quick whistle stop over the key highlight areas from IPQR, but happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thanks, Lorraine. So if I can open it up for questions, then we can direct questions to various colleagues as they would come in. Bert, I think you're first up.
Thank you, David, and thank you, Lorraine, for that. Firstly, I like the report style. I think it's to have that S-bar appendix. I just have one query, and I've maybe missed this. As a member of the Staff Governance Committee, I am aware of some of the greater detail around the information. But if we take, for example, information governance training, mandatory training, we're reporting only on information governance training. Other elements, mandatory training. Did we take a conscious decision in that earlier on that other elements of?
You were breaking up quite heavily there, and certainly in my system, Bert. But Fiona, did you catch enough of that question?
I did, yeah. I think this sounds just a wee bit quiet, but I think what Bert was asking was, in the IPQR, we've spotlighted one particular area of statutory and mandatory training, which is information assurance governance module. And whether or not that was a conscious decision to bring specific ones through in the IPQR, and I think that is how we've been working on this at the Staff Governance Committee. The workforce report that we bring through and the updates we do on statutory and mandatory training covers that full core suite of both online training and the face-to-face training. What we've been doing as we've developed the IPQR is typically focusing on one specific area at a time, just to give the board a bit of an oversight there. So that particular area is one that we are focusing on, and I know it was recently discussed at our information assurance meeting, and we've got some ideas about how we may well look at changing our access to systems to be dependent on that module being completed in order to manage that a bit better.
Okay, thank you very much for that explanation. Thank you.
Thanks, Fiona. Susan.
Thank you very much. I was really pleased to see the highlight on the delayed discharges, because I think for us that's one of the key indicators of how well integrated our whole system and the services are. But I wondered if you could say a bit more about the activities that are behind that plan at the moment, please.
Sure. I wonder if I can bring in either Lorraine or Louise. It might be in the first instance, please.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer. So we're taking a review of the programmes that we've got under unscheduled care at the moment and looking at that system-wide opportunities. I think there are about 20 to 25 work streams that sit under unscheduled care at the moment, which is quite a tough ask given the system pressures that we've got at the moment. So we're reviewing the ones that will have benefit over the winter period. So what do we need to focus our efforts on to get patients through our system, to increase flow? And we're picking them out. We've got a bit of a map of what that looks like and what do we need as a system to help support that. And then looking at the longer term opportunities that will help our system in the long run. But we felt it was important to support our workforce and the flow by prioritising the ones that would have most impact, Susan. But I'm happy to speak to you separately on that if that would help.
Thanks, Lorraine. And I think in the area, it is a good barometer. It's also the most complex area because there are so many different elements of our system that affects it. And one of the areas that we're looking at is to be able to improve the data that we have around this so that it's easier to come up with ideas or theories as to what might work. It's actually quite difficult to be able to do that in a measured way and know what the measured outcome is because there are so many different variables. But that's the attempt we're making at the moment so that we can focus our efforts to give us the best return for those efforts, recognising that time and resources are one of our constraining factors. Anne Clark.
Sorry, David, just struggling with the cursor there. So I wanted to make a comment and then ask a question. So we're working in the Highland Health and Social Care Partnership with Lorraine and her colleagues to develop the indicators relevant to the partnership that we might bring into the IPQR. So at the moment, there's a lot of those that aren't present here, particularly those relating to social care. So I really wanted to draw the board's attention to that, and that's not an indicator that system isn't under pressure. And the social care system, whether that be care at home or care homes, is under as much pressure as other parts of our system. And I think that the annual performance report later in the agenda highlights some of the ways in which it is under pressure. So I really just wanted to bring that to board members' attention, and that we are, of course, getting reports in the committee, despite the fact that we're working on these indicators still. So, but I just wanted to ask Pam, I was interested in what you were saying, Pam, in your own report, that you were, I think, meeting today to discuss ways in which the team could take the temperature and monitor what's happening in the system. So I was just looking for assurance that however you're going to be doing that will encompass the social care side of things as well as our hospitals and community health services. Thank you.
I'm happy to come back on that just now, just to say that that's what we're seeking to understand, and we've been given a tool that's been suggested nationally, which I do think in the first instance is very much focused around the hospital and the front door, but Lorraine has been looking at that in the context of our system and how, from the principles of that, or even in using that, could we apply some sort of regular objective tool that gives us some more context and accurate description of what's going on. So I'll be able to tell you more after we've met today, but we are interested in having something that measures the system.
Thanks. And I think it's fair to say that one of the areas that we want to target as we take this work forward is to make sure that the communication of the different, not so much the different pressures, because but more so the different actions that are being taken in the respective parts of the system. There can be a reaction that said, if somebody over there in the system could just sort their bit out, I would be okay. And they don't seem to be doing it, or they're not sorting it. And it can lead to higher levels of frustration. And the reality is, as Anne's pointed out, that every area of our system is under pressure. But we recognise that despite the pressure, there are opportunities that we can work better together to get better outcomes for the people that we're caring for. And some of that is having the confidence in our fellow colleagues in different parts of the system that they are working for that collective end. And so the communication is going to be a key element of that, so that we can build confidence with the team. Because we've made many attempts in this area before to make improvements. And unfortunately, while we have made improvements, they've not been sustained over time. and communication is certainly a key element to that. So that's one of the areas we're going to focus on. Alistair Christie.
Yes, thank you. My question is related to the acute dashboard, David. And on the cancer statistics, it's pleasing to see that we're meeting the 95% target. It's really brilliant that we're meeting the 95% target for those with 31 days. So the first question on that is, are we confident that we're able to sustain that performance? And on the 62-day target, when do we think we will actually be meeting the target, closing the gap on that? Because I notice it is improving gradually, and if we get the same trajectory, it should improve. The other one is not such good news, and that's on the CAMS. And I know we're still quite a long way behind, although between Q1 and Q2, we made quite a seismic jump in percentage performance. And I was wondering, what are we projecting for Q3 and Q4? Are we actually think we're going to get to the 90%? And around the waiting time for the first appointment, it would be good to get some anecdotal or some assurance that we've got the waiting list of 181 patients. Are we making inroads into that? I appreciate it is challenging, and it's not always the health board's fault's the wrong word, but area where there's other things going on in these young people's lives, and sometimes time passes and it's not always the health board's fault. Is there any way that we could get some analytical views or data around that? Thank you.
Thanks, Alistair. Good questions. I'll bring in Lorraine to talk about cancer, maybe introduce the CAMS discussion, and then maybe hand to Louise to carry that forward if I can.
Thanks, David. Yeah, I mean, 62 days is a challenge across the country, but there is direct analysis of those ones. So I think it's brachytherapy we refer to Edinburgh, and there's quite a lot out with NHS Highland referrals that impact on that. But there is close analysis and daily working on that, which is why the improvement is been happening. So there is, just for assurance, there is close monitoring of that and escalations if not. The CAMS, a lot is dependent on recruitment, but there is a target operating model being set for them that looks at how many new patients we get in and how many we're taking off the waiting list. So there's a lot of work being going on with that at present. And the waiting times for first appointment, we've obviously got routine and urgent. We just had a session on that at the performance board, I think last month. And what we're looking at within that space of outpatients is having a recovery plan that will help develop that trajectories, and that will fit into the annual operating plan moving forward. So quite a substantial amount of work going on in terms of that spaces. Thanks, David.
Thanks, Lorraine. And I think it's fair to say that the report around cancer has been significantly stepped up in terms of the way that we are managing our cancer patients and recognising the priorities that it's going to take to go through each step of treatment plans for patients, and it's certainly paying dividends. And actually those dividends have got a really positive impact, and the team, Noel Boyd and I met with the urology team a couple of weeks ago, and they were very positive, enthusiastic to see that they were improving the care and had greater plans ahead. So those areas where we are dependent upon the other hospitals and the other health boards are the more variable parts now of our process, but still there is opportunity within that. Louise, as far as CAMS, is there anything else that you wanted to add to what Lorraine said, conscious of time?
Just very briefly, absolutely, that the challenge is about recruitment, but also about doing things differently. And one of the things we absolutely need to do is work more collaboratively with the Highland Council. So it's not just about, what CAMS are doing, it's about what the wider system and the wider services are doing. So we do need to really focus on that. And at the moment, that's a key challenge, but something we're taking forward.
Thanks, Louise. I'm conscious of time. There's still a few hands up. Can I come to Graham, please?
Thank you. I think it's for Lorraine, this one. Lorraine, you mentioned the flow centre, and I wonder if you could just explain a bit more about how that works.
I think I'll need to defer to either Catherine. Is that okay if you pick that up?
Yeah, sure. Graham, could you just restate the question? Sorry, I didn't quite catch that.
Yes, and there was reference to the flow centre, and the term's used quite a lot, and I was wondering if you could just explain how it actually works. Thank you.
Yeah, so the Flow Navigation Centre was a model that the Scottish Government proposed as a way of redirecting activity away from the front doors of the emergency department and the acute services. So our Flow Navigation Centre for Highland actually doesn't just provide for Highland Health Board area, but it also provides for the Island Board areas as well. So it's set up in a room, obviously, with technology, and a lot of the work is delivered virtually. It has qualified GPs as a part of delivering that service, and also specialist nurses. And their aim is to try to treat people as rapidly, or give advice, if you like, as rapidly as possible regarding what the person that's contacted the centre might require. So some of that may be that they need to go to the emergency department, so they may identify that they need urgent immediate care, or they may need to go to the GP out of hours service in person, or they may need to go back to their GP surgery the following day. So there's sort of an assessment of it. There is an evaluation of the project going on, because what we haven't seen is a reduction in the numbers of presentation at our emergency department. Now, that could be for a variety of reasons. It could be that there has been an increase of presentations anyway, and the volume of people needing to attend emergency department has increased. So that's the general model. I hope that helps, Graham. We want to reevaluate, and we want to look more closely at that model to see how it may need to be sort of just slightly reshaped to meet the northern requirements, because it is based on a model that is much more sort of central Scotland based. So that piece of work is ongoing currently.
Thanks for the question. Gaynor, then Alex.
Morning, thank you, David. I'm just looking at the corporate performance part from page 231 onwards. And I appreciate that we'll be given an appendix with the data on it. But we talk about trend, but the trend data is not shown in the report, it's shown in the appendix. In terms of the arrows that we're using to show that trend, I think we just need to be clear on what we're trying to say. So I really liked on the previous pages the colour-coded one, where you knew if the arrow trend was a good thing or a bad thing. I would say I don't think we've quite got it right for the corporate performance part. So just to pull out one example, and there are a few examples. If you look at adverse events, we've got the adverse events are decreasing in the comments, which is positive, but the arrow is, the trend is increasing, and the total average for the two times that we specified show that they're increasing, not decreasing. And I suppose my point is, if we had the trend data there in terms of showing a graph, then we might be able to work that out. We haven't, but we do have it as an appendix, but it's not given us in a graphical form in the appendix. In fact, it's only given us a set of numbers for this financial year. So I think if we're talking about trends, we actually have to show the data that stacks that up. I can say the same for the data that we have and the comments that we have in terms of, I think it was tissue viability. So just making sure that we get that right, because if we're going to show it in a short form with just an appendix with some of the data there, it all has to stack up, it all has to back each other up. So we've got that triangulation that we can use as non-executives to take that assurance and take proper assurance rather than just be reassured with what we've been presented with. So so I think we're definitely getting there, but that would be something I think we need to work on a bit more in terms of corporate performance and how we show trends in a way that we can take that as assurance. Thanks.
Thanks, Gaynor. These comments are very helpful, and I think the backup information that we have provided this time around is certainly one. We had already noted that there were improvements we could make to that, and I think the trend is probably not the best of words to use. It's probably better to say direction rather than trend, because that gives different connotations altogether. So but thank you for the feedback. We'll certainly look at that for the next iteration. Thank you. Alex, finally.
Yeah, thanks, David. A couple of things. Building on a little bit what Gaynor was saying, I like the colour scheme within the acute care dashboard, etc. It's a little bit disconcerting that there's an awful lot of red, but it's only an awful lot of red because it's not meeting the national target. Most of it is actually improving. It's just that you've got to look at it, whereas if you just glanced at it, you went, oh God, it's all red. Why isn't it green? What have we got to do to get to green? So think about that part of it. The other bit is some of this is self-inflicted by our own policies and strategies. So, for example, we know that by cancelling electives, we're going to have an impact on some things like the 100% of patients to wait no longer than 12 weeks for inpatient or day case treatment. That's going to fall off. It's improved slightly. It's going to fall off next time because we had to make that decision. That's fine. But we have to, a bit like you said earlier, David, it's over there. It's not. It's an integrated package that's causing this, and we've got to be aware of it. But the one that was a bit strange for me, and I hadn't seen it before, was the community dashboard on page 3 of the actual report, where the bed days lost numbers and the patients' numbers, the trends look different. So bed days lost in April comes down a bit, and it keeps coming down when in actual patients the delayed discharge has shot up. I can't get a correlation between them. Is it because there is no correlation, or is there some kind of lag that's causing those numbers to present like that? Thanks.
Thanks, Alex. And it is quite difficult to get to the summary information without providing all of the backup and recognising that we can give you screeds of information or data at least that then you've got to sift through. So it is quite difficult to get the balance. I think you're looking at two different metrics here. One is a number of patients, and the second is related to the number of days that they're in hospital. So the number of patients can go down, and the way this is calculated is at the point when they are discharged. So if you've got a patient who's been in hospital for some considerable period of time, then they may be discharged after 100 days, for example, but it's only one patient. So it's not just it's the length of time as well as the number of patients that can give you that different part. Now, in terms of the detail of it, if I can come to that, I think it's probably most appropriate that level of detail is provided at the subcommittee. So I would ask the chairs of the subcommittees to work with the exec team and Lorraine and her team so that we can try and get the balance of the data presentation correct, because ultimately what's collated in this summary version should be the output from those subcommittees. So I'm happy to work with you, and Lorraine and I discussed it. I think what we'll do is probably set some formal time to do that rather than try just to do it by email as we've done this time around. But no, thank you for the feedback. It's really helpful so that we can better refine this for the future. With that, Chair, I'm sorry I've gone over time yet again, but I'll let me hand back to you.
Okay, David, thank you for that. And before we leave that particular topic, just to reflect on the visit you and I had to the Highland Urology Centre, strikes me that investment is important in driving forward performance. You have to invest, as has happened there in form of a robot, which we saw in operation on that day, but also new ways of working linked to that. And you see a very sharp increase in performance in that in these specialities. I would also like just to say that this digest of information that David and Lorraine are presenting today, it's an evolving picture for us as we go forward. We're trying to find the best way of reporting back to you on it. And personally, I do like the format here. We probably need some more information along the lines that Gaynor was suggesting, and certainly it would be good to incorporate the kind of information about social care that Anne raised. But thank you both for all you're doing to present us with intelligible data that we can wrestle with then. We move on to more intelligible data now in the form of finance, and ask David to speak to. I think, are you doing a presentation today, David?
No, just, well, I'll quickly run through the paper. That's okay, Chair, and right. Take any questions at the end. So the finance paper represents the financial position at October, which is our month 7. And it's reflecting a year-to-date overspend of £11.9 million and a potential year-end overspend of £20.4 million. Now, the reason I say potential is that government have recently written to health boards to outline that, recognising the pressures in the system at the moment, that they will be supporting boards to deliver a break-even position. So whilst we're overspending by £20 million potentially at the end of the year, we're fully expecting either an improved position or funding from government to bring us back into break-even. So at this point in time, we're forecasting a break-even by the end of the year, subject to government support. That doesn't mean that we've rested in our laurels, if you like, and we're still looking at ways of improving the financial position and improving our savings delivery, and looking at what we can do to mitigate some of the high cost expenditure we're seeing coming through the system right now. So in table 1 of the paper, it breaks down the overspend and the forecast into the operational units, and you can see that our acute division is looking at an overspend of just over £8 million. Was classified as support services, and we'll change this for the next report. Is primarily an undelivered savings, is showing an adverse movement of £11.3 million, and our health and social care partnership in the north, 0.7 million, and our Gallan Butte, 0.3 million pounds. So that's the component parts of the overspend. Primarily, really, it boils down to acute pressures of £8 million and unexpected delivery of savings of £12 million, where we're at right now. In terms of acute, the three main drivers in acute are effectively locum costs, agency costs for backfilling staff, and drugs as well are showing a significant overspend this year. And of the £8 million, £2.1 million relates to the 2 RGHs, Rural General Hospitals in the north. In terms of the Health and Social Care Partnership in Highland, primarily the 2 drivers there right now are the police custody costs, where we're having to staff with locums, and also some significant pressures in our care at home service. And our Gallan Butte, the main drivers of their overspend are locum costs in the Lauren Niles Hospital. There's obviously a myriad of ins and outs and ups and downs, but these are the main items of expenditure that are causing overspends at the moment. In terms of our savings delivery, board members will remember that we set a pretty challenging target of £32.9 million at the beginning of the year, which was always going to be a challenge. But of course, the way the service has evolved in the last number of months, and the pressures that we're seeing has meant that we haven't been able to deliver to the level that we had originally hoped, and we're expecting, as I said earlier, a £12 million shortfall in those savings. The PMO continues to try and improve that outturn, and we're having a range of different initiatives to try and stimulate some further improvements in our savings delivery. But there's no doubt that compared to previous years, the ability to deliver savings in the current year has diminished considerably. Although we have maintained the processes in place, so we haven't given up in terms of the processes we put in place to make us a more cost-effective organisation. It's just that the volume of issues that we're facing right now have meant the savings haven't been delivered in the way that we'd hoped. I'll touch on capital. We've got a fairly significant capital allocation this year of £72.9 million, and we've spent £23.3 million of that up to now. Always the hockey stick in terms of spend for capital, but we are confident at this stage that we will spend the £72.9 million on the schemes we've identified. To date, the most of the expenditure has been on the Skye and Badenoch hospitals and the National Treatment Centre, £13 million and just under £7 million respectively. I'll finish, Chair, just by touching on 22-23 and beyond in terms of the challenges that we're facing, and we recognise that we're facing. We've got a budget in the 9th of December where NHS will be advised of its uplifts, or the majority of its uplifts, for the coming year, and then we'll be able to fully identify the gap that we're facing going into 22-23. But there's little doubt that the knowns that we have already in terms of non-recurrent savings delivery, in terms of the gap in adult social care funding, is going to be a very, very challenging gap that we're facing in future years, like most of Scotland, in terms of what they're facing too. And we're working hard to try and start preparing for that as soon as we can, so that we can start making as many plans as we can going into next year. So we'll update you on the next meeting in terms of or probably in between actually, in terms of the budget settlement and the implications for the board. I'll stop there and happily take any questions.
Thank you, Dave. Question from Graham Hardy.
Thanks, Chair. Thanks for that, David. You're talking about cost pressures regarding drugs, and I just wondering, I don't know if I've asked this question before, is that on reflection of Brexit and COVID, or what's causing the rise in drug prices? Because you mentioned an antidepressant that was soaring through the roof. Thanks.
Yeah, the antidepressant was last year. That was a short supply issue. So and there's lots of issues facing drugs in terms of supply. I don't think I can answer 100% accurately and say it's Brexit or whatever's driving it, but there's a mixture of short supply and simply an increase in demand. And the drug pressures we're talking about primarily are acute, rather than actually primary care ones where you'd see the antidepressants. I know, for example, Lucentis, which is injections into the eye, the cost of that have increased significantly again in the current year. And I don't know if Catherine's got any further intelligence around drug costs and acute, but certainly that's where the main pressures are.
Thanks, David.
Catherine, do you want to comment?
Yeah, drug pressures in acute are extreme and are a very large proportion of the overspend that we're seeing in acute services. We are going to be coming forward to work with Dave to look at a rebasing of the drugs budget going into next financial year, because certainly the funding that we allocated, and our assumptions, which were based on previous year, where we saw a big reduction in the number of patients that we had to cater for through the acute services. I think those have been challenging for us in terms of what we've put into the budget going into this year. So we'll continue to work with Dave on that. There are some potential opportunities around using different drugs for the injection into the eye, and we had plans to bring in changes around that, and those plans have been scuppered again by COVID. So that's another part of our savings thinking going into next financial year. So it's complex and really needs to be understood in its intricate detail. And our Associate Director of Pharmacy is pulling together a report really examining what is going on within our acute service. What do we think our projections are going to be going forward, so that we can be hopefully a bit more accurate in terms of our budgeting plans going forward. Thanks.
Thanks, Catherine.
If I can add to that, Chair, sorry, just in terms of the rebasing issue, and it's not just around rebasing our drugs budgets. We put in a huge amount of effort in rebasing all of our budgets in 2 years ago in January, February of that year, and then of course COVID came along, and all the work has effectively been wiped out, because the budgets that we have now at that time are based on the services and how we delivered them at that point in time. So there is a need in the medium term to completely rebase our budgets based on the service delivery models that we have in place right now. But it's not an easy 5-minute piece of work to do that, and in some areas we don't actually know what the final delivery model will look like, and that's kind of links into the work Lorraine's doing in terms of development strategy, etc. So we're going to have a couple of years of turmoil in terms of budgets, so until we get back to that place, I think.
Thank you, David. Anne?
So in terms of looking ahead, David, obviously the support that we were able to secure from Scottish Government in relation to our transformation plans around adult social care was very important this year. I wondered if we had any indication of what the expectation might be from Scottish Government of what we in the Council would have to achieve to be able to continue that support.
As it stands right now, the latest communication we've had from government is that it's up to us in the council to work together to come up with a solution around adult social care, and there's no offer of financial support available at this point in time. However, we are still in discussions both with the council. I know that Pam's trying to arrange a meeting with government to discuss that in terms of its doability, if you like, because it's such a big challenge in terms of the financial gap that's likely to face us going into next year.
Okay, thanks. I think that, so what just I think it's important to acknowledge that that the work that has gone on within our own adult social care team to achieve the forecast savings, although they're non-recurrent, it's still a great achievement in terms of the past year. So I think it's important to acknowledge that, despite the fact that there's a lot of work still to be done there. Obviously, there's a lot of uncertainty still in this situation, David, as you've mentioned. I'm no doubt that the council is a bit uncertain about its budgets next year, as we are. You know, how do you see the next few months? What do you see as being, when do you think we'll have a better understanding of just what our financial pictures might be, so that we could try and, you know, take forward some of these discussions?
I'm certainly hoping from an NHS perspective we'll be in a relatively firm position pre-Christmas. Between now and between December the 9th and Christmas, we'll be working hard to come up with an initial draft of where we are sitting in terms of NHS. I think the discussions with the council are ongoing in terms of how we may approach next year, and alongside that as well, coming into the new year, I guess that will help to determine what the size of the problem is going into next year, once we have a better idea of how much money we're spending in the current year, because we're getting significant amounts of allocations from government in terms of the winter monies, £300 million, and as you know, and IGBs have the ability to carry that into the future years, whereas we have a slight difficulty with that in terms of our lead agency model. Of course, if there are underspends in that, which we think there will be some underspends in those monies, we are able to protect them and use them potentially to help with the position again next year, but again subject to government assurance around that one. So I'm hoping that the NHS Highland position will be pretty well known by Christmas, and then in the new year, hopefully we'll have a better understanding of what the problem facing us going into the next year and beyond.
Okay, I think, well, sounds like our meeting of the Joint Monitoring Committee in January will be quite an important one for this discussion. Thanks.
You're on mute, Boyd.
Thank you, Anne. And I would like to place on record our appreciation of the work that has been done to effect the, I think it was 3 million savings in adult social care this year. That's no mean feat, and I would like to thank all involved in delivering that. Alex.
Thanks, Jeff. A couple of things. One probably more for Alan Wilson and yourself, Dave, and then one for you. In terms of the move forward, I'm starting to think a couple of 3 years ahead now, and the move towards net zero and environmental impact, etc. What are we going to be doing to make sure that our estate can deal with getting to net zero as quickly as the Scottish Government would like? I'm looking at, for example, in your capital scheme in that table, there's a boiler replacements, there's a Campbelltown boiler replacement, there's other boiler replacement works. Some of it's costing quite a considerable amount of money. Is that already thinking about the fact that we're trying to move away from fossil fuels, or is that going to be a bog standard boiler? And how are we then going to move towards net zero in the future? And the other thing, Dave, is maybe we actually need a line somewhere in the process which actually says, you know, move towards net zero or environmental sustainability or whatever you want to call it, so we can actually see how much it's starting to A, target cost, and B, if there are any savings from it, because it's not going to be a cheap option, that's for sure. Thanks.
Thanks, Alan. I'm going to quickly throw that slippery ball over to Alan Wilson, if that's okay.
Alan.
Thanks, Chair. And Alex, well, we've just had a letter through from Scottish Government in regards to the strategy, the net zero carbon strategy, and I think it was something like 69 recommendations on it. So I've taken the thankless task role of being the exec lead for net zero carbon. So on the back of that, what we've done is we've set up a governance process right away. So we've got a sustainability environmental board set up, just like we're doing a project, and a team who will deliver. So the starting points having an assessment done on net zero carbon. So it was 2 pilot boards. I think it was Orkney and another board that Health Facilities Scotland had funded. So they were getting an audit on how they would achieve net zero carbon and what the likely cost is going to be. So they're working on that just now. And then once that's completed, they'll then be putting that out to the other boards. So that would be our starting point. The amounts of money will be significant, and we have to achieve it. So as you're saying to Dave, we will have to put money aside for it to achieve it. There's no option on it now. In regards to boilers, as you're aware, the technologies are changing. We've no got that great options there now. We're talking about one of the boiler we're talking about is down in Campbelltown. It's a biomass that's going in, so it will save us, you know, on energy, and we're looking at how we'd further enhance that. But again, it's time limited, so we've got a hospital to run, so it's making sure we can get it as best as we possibly can at this early stage. All the new projects we will do, we're doing a net zero strategy on them all, so that will help us. We're currently working with a number of external people just now in regards to the use of hydrogen as well as electrical, because I think I've mentioned before, I think hydrogen's a better option for us as a board, given the size of the boilers and things like that. So there's 2 projects locally that's taken off really quickly, and it's with private companies who have allowed us to engage with them. So they're putting all the research and development into it, and hopefully we'll be able to piggyback off the back of it once they've trialled it and that. So there's a lot of work going on. We're at the early stages, but we have taken recognition of it, and as I said, it's not a we'd like to do A, it's a must do A, so we need to be ready for it.
Thank you, Alan. Any further points for David and his team? If not, can I thank you, David, and your colleagues for all the work you do to manage our finances in very difficult circumstances, frustratingly difficult, I'm sure, and we're in an almost unreal situation that the financial transformation programme on which we embarked, we met our targets handsomely in the first year. We were on track to meet them in the second year till COVID struck. Now in this third year, we are with government subventions going to meet the target. But nevertheless, the challenges ahead are quite daunting going forward. Okay. Thank you. And we move on now to items of culture. And Fiona is going to take the floor for the next three items, beginning with a board assurance report on culture.
Thank you, Chair. So yeah, firstly, you'll note that the covering paper is presented in a slightly different format this time. So this is a new assurance report template that we've been trialling within the Staff Governance Committee, starting in our November meeting. So in addition to the usual areas on the report, we include which of our board objectives this relates to, as set out in the one-year strategy. And you'll see that culture obviously covers not only the 5 Great Place to Work objectives, but also 2 of our partners in care. And that, I think, clearly articulates how culture is about how we work every day, not about something extra or optional. There's also a more substantial risk assessment section and a data protection section in this new template. The other main difference is that our report proposes a level of assurance that the board may take from the report. So in this particular report, I'm proposing the board takes substantial level of assurance, and that's given the significant progress made in the last 2 months and the overall green programme status of the culture programme. Obviously, myself and the board secretary welcome any feedback from board members and board attendees on the new format, because it is our intention to roll this style of paper out more widely going forward. I say, in terms of the culture programme itself, I'm really pleased to report the strong progress made and the return to a green status. Since we last met, the first 4 cohorts of the Leadership and Management Development Programme, which is for 72 colleagues, have been inducted to the programme and they've completed their first modules. Myself and 3 of the other executives were involved in presenting an element of their induction for each cohort, and we plan to stay in touch with that cohort as they progress through the programme. We're now working on fine-tuning the selection and onboarding process and also identifying the plan for further cohorts, particularly at level 1 and level 2 of the programme, where we have a large number of supervisors and managers. It has been a massive undertaking to get this all ready, and I'd like to thank everyone involved in the workstream and in the wider learning, organisational development and people teams for their work, both in pulling it together and in delivering, as well as all the subject matter experts who are designing content for some of the more specialist modules of the programme. And these things like risk, finance, health and safety are all additional essential areas for managers to be competent and confident in overseeing. We've also now got our project officer in place in the culture programme, and he's working on our wellbeing work stream and approach. So from the January report, we will be reporting on this work stream as in the other work streams on the dashboard. Our initial focus for wellbeing has been on working with colleagues to identify priority areas for some of the funding that we've received. We've got funding from Scottish Government, ring-fenced for wellbeing, and we've also got funding from our endowments and from the Charities Together funding. We'll also be looking at our strategy and plan for wellbeing. We've received over 100 suggestions from colleagues to date about ideas for how we use that wellbeing funding, and there's a group been set up to plan and take that forward. Wellbeing along with civility saves lives, which includes the promoting professionalism approach, are two of our key priorities for the year ahead, and their updated milestones will form part of the revised culture programme plan now that some of our key areas have moved into delivery. The third area which we'll be picking up is around performance management and development, and you'll see from further reports later on that that's a key area that we know we need to work on from the organisation learning report from the healing process. These are all key areas that impact on everyone every day at work and allow us to start moving the culture programme much more into the business as usual space and reaching even more colleagues. One thing that we are getting ready to roll out is our values animation, and we will be sharing that with all colleagues and finding ways to share that on social media and in key locations where there are screens available. We think it really helps articulate what our values are and how we bring them to work every day. But I'd love to be able to share that with you. So we are just working on slightly tweaking the voiceover that goes with it, but I'm going to attempt by the magic of technology to share that with you, and we'll see if this works. It just takes about 3 minutes. Windows. This is a real test of my technological capability. And if people can let me know if they can hear sound when I start it.
NHS Highland is changing.
Yes.
The organisation that we want it to be. All of us need to live our values every day. Care and compassion are core to our values. Colin shows this when he brings a cup of tea to a teammate who's having a hard day, as well as when he comforts a patient's daughter. We need to be open and honest and take responsibility for our actions, like Kim. When Kim realised she'd made a mistake at work, she told her manager straight away so that it could be put right. Together, they worked out how they could avoid the mistake happening again. As senior leaders, we need to be open to listening to feedback from teams and making changes. That's why we have shared the results of the Listening and Learning Survey, arranged visits by directors across the NHS Highland area, and why we're acting on local concerns. Everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect. Sanjeev shows respect for the people he cares for by listening to what they like, from their favourite TV programme to their end-of-life care. We need to treat each other with respect too, and accept that while we may have different opinions, we are all trying to do our best. At NHS Highland, you are part of a team made up of thousands of hard-working people. We all bring valuable skills and experience, which contributes to us offering high-quality care, the sort of care we would want for our own loved ones. Our Listening, Learning and Living Our Values programme of cultural transformation is well underway, with support, training, learning and engagement to help us change. We need to support each other, and we need to work with communities and partner organisations. No one person has all the answers, but together we can improve the health and well-being of people across Highland and at Gowland Butte. So let's listen, learn and live our values.
Okay, I'll hand back to Boyd.
Follow that. I won't attend to it, but any questions, comments from Fiona on the format of presentation of the report, the new format, or on the substance of the progress report under the headings, under the various work streams. Sarah.
Thanks, Chair. So just I was going to talk about this when I summarised the minutes of Staff Governance Committee, but I'll talk about it now, seeing as Fiona spoke about it. So the new style of report, just to say on that, I would absolutely endorse it, and I think members of my committee found it really helpful as well. I suppose my anxiety about it, or one of the things I was conscious of when we first started using it, was would it sort of suggest to people a level of assurance that actually wasn't appropriate, but I think it had the opposite effect. I think as a committee it made us really question if the proposed level of assurance was right, and if we had seen evidence to allow us to accept or suggest an amendment to that. And so just on that, would fully supportive of seeing that rolled out through our other committee structures as well. In terms of the content of what Fiona's just shared with us, I think first of all to say I'm very happy with the level of assurance that Fiona's suggesting here. We've seen, obviously we look at this very closely in staff governance. We've seen huge progress. As Fiona said, it's moved to a green status from previously amber. So it's very clear that Fiona and her colleagues have put in a huge amount of work into moving this forward, which I think is to be commended anyway, but especially having heard from Pam earlier the pressures everybody's under. So I think that's really good to see. But I suppose that does bring me on to looking to the future. I guess we know that we're under sustained pressure, that the pressure is there, it's increasing, we're coming into winter pressures as well. I suppose my question to Fiona is, how are we going to try and make sure we sustain that momentum and sustain the, moving us back to green? We want to make sure we don't lose that, but obviously we need to be realistic about capacity and resource and what we focus our energy on, and just wondered if we'd had thoughts about how we could do that.
Fiona?
Yeah, thanks, Sarah, and I think it's a really important question for us, because as you say, we've sustained the culture programme right through, from March 2020. We haven't stopped at any point in time, unlike some of our other pieces of work. I think we do have some additional resource supporting the culture programme that allows us that is purely focused on that at this point in time, which does allow us from a kind of preparation and management perspective to have extra capacity that can't really be deployed anywhere else. I think for us it's all about the things that we're working on and making sure that the pace of how we deploy them out into the organisation is being driven by the ability and the capacity of the organisation to receive them. So you'll note in the report we talk about the team conversations approach. We've got a number of teams who were very keen to pilot that and for us to fine tune that approach. How we roll that out, we will be led by the organisation and by the respective teams about having the capacity. Our priorities around well-being, around civility and professionalism, in some ways they're the right priorities for where we are right now, because actually working in a pressured system, it becomes even more important that we're looking after people. They've got the practical and the emotional and the kind of support that's around them, and that actually we're focusing on making sure that stress and pressure doesn't translate into a decline in relationships. So I think it's one we're very attuned to, but I think it's hopefully the kind of ongoing planning and engagement as part of the culture oversight group lets us speed things up and slow them down and tweak them as the system needs us to.
Thanks, Sarah and Fiona. It's Bert, actually. Bert.
Thank you, Chair. I like the new style of report, and I would echo Sarah's comments in relation to that. Just a couple of comments and a question. I'm pleased to see the progress with the leadership and development programme. I think in all of the work that we've been undertaking, we've recognised how important it is to have this. And certainly when I've been out and about doing visits, I think the opportunity for people to participate in that has been appreciated. One observation in relation to that, and I reported back on this following a recent visit to Argyll and Bute, is that it would appear some members of staff are not aware of the opportunities. I don't know if you've had... Hello, I'm getting a lot of feedback there. Are you hearing me okay? Yeah. I did report back in that, and hopefully that's something that can be looked into. The final point is a question. Where we see some amber colours in relation to progress, there is an accompanying comment about organisational capacity. I'm just trying to work out in my mind if that organisational capacity is about the sheer scale of the work that we are undertaking. If it is that combined with the pressures that we are operating under during these unique circumstances that we are operating under, or what is the reason for the organisational capacity, and is there a way of dealing with this, I suppose? Thank you.
Thanks, Bert. And yeah, specifically around the feedback around access to the training within Argyll and Bute, I think we've learned already from that although the applications were opened out to everyone, there's a bit of a check that we need to then do where people are being nominated to make sure if we don't have nominations from a representative kind of population, that we follow up with the leadership teams there to make sure that they have access, and we'll be absolutely doing that with the next cohort. So we've learnt quite a lot already. Yeah, in terms of that organisational capacity, I think the main limitation we have is about the ability. So if I think of team conversations as an intervention, that is something that basically a team will take a half day with 2 facilitators to go through and help them understand how they are going to live their values going forward. It's quite a tailored and personal intervention. What we recognise is that actually there are a number of teams who are very keen to go through that, and because of the particular circumstances they're in, will be able to do that. But actually what we don't want to do is to be sort of deploying the rollout of that at a pace that actually means that some teams who would really like to do it but don't currently have the capacity or the headspace to kind of dedicate to that, or feel they would get more benefit from it slightly later, that we kind of roll that out. I think the other piece around organisational capacity is that we can put additional capacity in place if it's around things like creating things and delivering things, and we have done that. So it is much more about just making sure that the things we're focusing on are what people need right now, and that they can make the most use of them. And what we will do where we have things that actually we decide to slightly change the format or the pace or the delivery, we'll then revise the plan accordingly in terms of the timescales.
Okay, thank you for that.
Thanks, Bert. Alex.
Thanks, Boyd. Yeah, thanks, Fiona. Very good. I like the report. Dashboard's good too. But as an old program manager, that's part of the problem. The thing is, what you've actually shown is that you're doing great and you've done great, thanks very much, but guess what? The next part of the programme is slipping, and slipping quite a bit because it's all amber. Now, how you deal with that and your organisational capacity you just talked to. The bit that worries me is says, but revised date will be met. Looking at it from here, I don't know how you can say that yet. You might be able to say it in a couple of 3 months' time, but just now that's a bit more difficult. The question, though, is why can you claim the overall culture programme status is green when there's so much amber on what's to come? Because in reality, and that's part of your problem with this, you're only as good as what you're going to do, not what you've done. That's unfortunate, but that's the way of programme management. So great, thanks very much, but now what? So that's why I think the green may be I could see how you could get there, but I think in reality it probably should still be sitting at amber now. Last month you might have been able to claim it. This month I'm not so sure. Thanks.
happy to yeah, take that. And I think these things are because ultimately there isn't a scientific formula, so it does kind of go on judgment. I think from my perspective, a lot of the amber things are because actually we haven't got the detail, so we're being very clear that actually the detailed plan that sits below that is in the process of being revised. So for example, civility saves lives is our next thing. We've agreed the resource and the commitment to that. We're now scoping out what is the best way to deploy civility saves lives, and we've got some resources that are coming out on that. But actually with our Director of Medical Education, who's been leading on this, we've been looking at actually slightly changing that approach to deploy more along the promoting professionalism approach, because we think that that will be really helpful to us in our context. So I think my kind of summary of quite a few of the ambers is maybe I tend to, I've worked in a project management environment before, and I am very much of the opinion that you need to be honest and realistic. So, I'm saying amber because I haven't got a fixed date, and we're slightly slipping off where we thought we were going to be. Some people choose to report green. They can see the iceberg, but they'll only be green. They'll only be amber once they've hit the iceberg. So it's I do kind of try and hold us to quite a good account on that. But I think it is about that slight kind of phase that we're now moving into in the programme, because actually those new things that we're moving into are the ones that we now need to plan out, and that plan does need to be, as you say, realistic. So what can we achieve with our resources, but more importantly, because these things are all about directly working with people in the organisation. This is where culture moves into not just being a project, but into something people see every day. So that's why it's so important that we get those capacity and timing issues kind of right, to be as helpful as it can be, but not to create any additional pressure.
Okay. Thanks, Alex. Anne, followed by Susan.
Hi, Fiona. So I too like the new report format. My understanding is that it's really well evidenced now that this sort of work around culture has a direct impact on patient care. And I guess I'm wondering whether we could usefully focus a little bit more on that. It is mentioned in your paper, but for example, I'm wondering if specifically we should be reference our Keeping You Safe strategic objective against this cultural programme as well. But specifically, I was wondering whether within the work stream on metrics, there's been any thought given to, whether we can make a connection there between the specific metrics about people and this programme and our patient outcome metrics. I realise that may be a very complex thing to do, and maybe it's not possible, but I think it may be also that this is covered by your the professionalism work focus that you're introducing. I don't know, but anyway, it was just a thought that it might be important both for the public, but also for some of our staff who, are maybe feeling reasonably okay about the organisation to see the connection more directly between this work and our patient safety outcomes. Thanks.
Thanks, and that's and I think it's a hugely important part for us, and that definitely is something that we're looking at within culture metrics, because we know, as you say, there's a couple of things. The promoting professionalism work done by Jerry Hickson at Vanderbilt University is absolutely has evidence-based, kind of data that shows that early resolution and introducing, measures to tackle minor disturbances in the force, as he calls them, or incivilities in the workplace, has a direct correlation on patient outcomes and patient safety, as well as on, you know, how colleagues feel about being at work. So there's a direct link there, and we'd be very keen to be using some of those metrics. I think one of the things that Pam and I have been talking about with other colleagues is making better use of care opinion, for example, you know, and actually really promoting that, because again, then sort of translating patients' experience and their feedback, you know, directly into then how that impacts is really key to us. So that's definitely a part of our focus, and one I think, you know, we should, because ultimately it is why we're all here, and being able to measure that is key.
Susan.
Thank you, Chair. And I too really like the new style of the report and look forward to seeing them rolled out to the other papers that we received. I was going to make exactly that point, Anne, about the impact on outcomes. So thank you for raising that as well. I'd be quite keen to know what people's experience of being in this programme has been. So to hear from some of the people maybe in that cohort, and not necessarily today, but maybe it could be part of a development meeting or something that we have where we actually hear from someone how it has made a difference to them, how it has made a difference to their experience of care. Just pick up on that more sort of, you know, I suppose quantitative, qualitative side of things. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that would be really, really good. And actually now we've got a number of different things that have made an impact on people, whether that's about our, as you say, the learning and development opportunities, maybe teams that go through the team conversations in the initial pilot, but also things like our Guardian service and our EAP. And there's something about those colleague stories that's really important, both in us understanding how valuable that is, but also in making people more confident who maybe have not participated in some of these things, or are a little bit skeptical, or, you know, need that trust to be further built up. So I think that's that storytelling is definitely something we should focus on.
Kate, what about Pam?
Thank you, Boyd. And just following up and supporting Fiona's response, and very briefly, but excellence in care is the National Care Assurance Framework born out of the Veil of Leaving, as I'm sure you are all familiar, and that's relevant to nurses and midwives, but has recently been extended to allied health professionals. And I know from the Clinical Governance Committee, Heidi had brought an update there herself around the work that we are proposing around a care assurance system for NHS Highland. But within that programme, we're delighted to see the development of a psychological safety metrics, which does that very thing. That's about triangulating the information around the whole culture within the care setting and how that positively or adversely impacts on the quality and safety. And I think we've got some really good examples that we need to build on in Highland, where our teams are already pulling things together through value management and having that data driving decisions at ward and team-based level, and looking at the totality of that total quality system. So I think we are inextricably linked with Fiona's work and Helen Freeman's work. So delighted to share any further information around that.
Thanks, Kate. Thanks for sharing that.
Thanks, Chair. I think just drawing that together, you know, I guess it's back to where is it we're actually trying to get to here. So we're trying to get to a position where we have a very open, transparent and fearless organisation in the interests of high quality care being delivered to the public that we serve. And so that absolutely endorse what everybody said about the relationship between the culture and the safety and the quality of care that we deliver. And so that actually getting the messaging to really get into that space, I think makes it very meaningful as well, in terms of, you know, so how do we need to be as individuals in that situation? How do we need to be as a team in that situation? Who's the team? Because in this world, the team isn't your profession, and it isn't the one or two people standing around you. It's who's best placed to help you get the best outcome for that individual that might not even be in your organisation. So that the kind of mindset is quite a shift for people. But if we can keep promoting that messaging in that way, where it's in the wider context as well. So this is not just about getting along together. In fact, it's not necessarily about all being friends. It's about being respectful of each other and kind to each other, but actually disagreement might be as critical in that space as agreement, and therefore that ability to speak up. So we need to keep building that message. And I think my second point that I wanted to make is going back to the business as usual aspects. So we can create all the programs and projects we like. This is how if this doesn't translate into how we all are in this organisation on a day-to-day basis, and how as execs with our teams, we make this a key focus in terms of checking in all the time and what the temperature is within your departments, within your teams, then it will become, it'll become academic. So we know that there are people who still feel that they haven't experienced the change, and that they still experience some behaviours that they don't find particularly helpful. So we're a human system where that is going to continue to occur. We need to keep this front and foremost in terms of just how we are on a day-to-day basis, and be starting first with ourselves, and then starting with those around us to try and demonstrate what we're stating is how we think we need to be. So I couldn't understate how important I believe that to be, that the programme is a bonus. The additional pieces of work are a bonus. It's the same when we put people off to do training. If you come back into a culture or a custom and practice that's not conducive to what we're after, you will soon default to the custom and practice of that team. So this is within our gift, and actually right now is the right time for us to, as others have said, to be really demonstrating something different when our staff are working in really difficult circumstances. So I just want to emphasise those points.
Thanks, Pam. Completely agree with these points. Draw this part of the proceedings to close. The new reporting format has found widespread favour, Fiona, here, and can I take it that we have derived substantial assurance, despite Alex's queries, that we have as a group derived substantial assurance from Fiona's report? Okay, thank you. We were to have lunch at this point, but bearing in mind that we've only got 1 hour and 20 minutes on our tanks since the break, I think we should push on with the rest of the cultural agenda. Fiona, over to you again on item 11, the third organisational learning report.
Thank you, Chair, and apologies, you'll start getting bored of my voice by the end of this. But so we've now received our third organisational learning report from the independent review panel of the healing process. That's set out in Appendix 1 along with Appendix 2, which is our proposed actions for the 11 new recommendations made, and a progress update on the actions from the first 2 reports. On the first report that had 22 recommendations, 6 of those have now been complete, 13 are green and 3 are amber. And on the second report that had 6 recommendations, 4 are green and 2 are amber. Those which are amber are mainly large-scale pieces of work which are on our priority list for the coming year, such as induction, diversity and inclusion, performance management, and the introduction of our case management system, but that we haven't had the capacity to deliver to date, or that we had always anticipated being multi-year programmes. An important part of our approach does need to be about being realistic about how many things we can deliver, and particularly, as we've just said, that our people can accommodate. So we'll continue to fine-tune timescales and plans to make sure we get the maximum benefit to colleagues while being sensitive to the challenges the system is facing. The panel notes in their report that there has been evidence of the commitment and change at the top of the organisation, but also that it is taking time to filter through the organisation. There was an acknowledgement that this was understandable, given the complexity and diversity that we work with within Highland, and noted the ongoing work that we have in this area. And we've always been very clear that culture change is a long journey, but as we set out just now, our focus is on reaching out into the organisation and supporting colleagues to make the difference where they work. The report also draws out some recurring themes which they outlined in their report, and we've addressed progress on these in the summary paper. The 11 new recommendations include support needed for those relocating to our more remote and rural areas, as well as the challenges of leadership and clinical governance in these settings. They note the pressures of working in the health and care system and how national performance targets and pressures to deliver, if not properly managed locally, can increase challenges for colleagues. There's also a reference to the primary care sector, which is typically an independent, not employed group of colleagues, and ensuring that we manage bullying and inappropriate behaviour and support colleagues with that in that different setting. I think another really important theme that we've talked about a little bit already and is at the heart of our wellbeing programme is around the importance of mental health as much as physical health. We've also got an ongoing focus on, we're also being asked to make sure that we continue to focus on early resolution and having a person-centred approach as a priority where we have cases where things aren't going well for colleagues. And I think that need to look at early resolution and not going straight into formal processes is borne out by the fact that having independently investigated 34 reports under the bullying and harassment policy since April 2019, only 6 of those found a case to answer that could be progressed. And those investigations are complex, they're time consuming, they're really stressful for all involved. And the low number of outcomes clearly indicates that actually the majority of these cases probably would have been better addressed through facilitated discussions, mediation and other early resolution approaches. So it's really important we continue to encourage that, and we're working in partnership on that. There are a significant amount of helpful insights and information in the report, and we'll continue to use these to drive our progress forward. There will be a final overarching report from the independent review panel, likely around July 2022. They will provide a further interim learning report only if there are additional matters arising which haven't previously been noted between now and when they hold their final panels, which are scheduled for early March. We have also included some information about the current status of the hearing process as it moves into the final months of hearing cases. There have been 283 eligible participants who are still active and 57 who withdrew or were found not to be eligible. And we continue to hear anonymised recommendations as a remuneration committee every 4 weeks. And we've got another 24 cases coming through to our meeting on the 13th of December. So there's lots of information in the report about the recommendations and our actions to address these new ones and the progress we've made to date. But I'm keen to hand back to the chair and take any questions that have come up for people.
Okay, thank you, Fiona. This is another important part of our culture programme going forward, how we as an organisation respond to the points raised by the independent panel through these reports. Not just through these reports, but also through meetings we have with them on a regular basis. I think the next one is scheduled for January. And these are opportunities for us to have wide-ranging discussion with the panel. Bert.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Fiona, for describing the content of the report to us. I simply wanted to say that my recent visits to Argyll and Bute have actually raised many of the points that have been covered in the report. So I suppose to a certain extent that gives an added level of perhaps corroboration to what the report is telling us. I won't touch on any of these points. As I say, many of the things that have been discussed with me are covered in that report. The only point that I would make, which I think is of relevance and perhaps of interest to the board, is the point about an awareness that there is a lot going on, and particularly at the top of the organisation, but that it is taking time to filter down through the organisation to those folk who are working at the front level. And you've touched upon that yourself, Fiona, in your comments. So that's all I was going to say, really. Thank you for that.
Thank you, Bert. Yes, I think we're aware of what would appear to be a kind of log jam in the system. That's been feedback that we've received from whistleblowers when we met with them as well. Sarah.
Thanks, Boyd. My question is quite specific, but then it broadens out into a more general question. It's in the summary of the paper, so I think it's on page 41 if you're looking at the whole pack. Right at the bottom of the page, it talks about that we need to use recent survey feedback to ensure a better understanding of the integration model within Argyll and Bute. And that sort of perplexed me a little bit when I first read it. I suppose that was, it felt odd to me that we were saying that people didn't understand the integration model, but then on a little bit further down, I think maybe page 55, it actually talks about, and I think this is maybe what they meant in the summary, was that actually is it about the impact of integration on the culture in our workforce, and that kind of felt more that made more sense to me, I guess, because we are aware that there can sometimes be that feeling of disconnect with our workforce in Argyll and Bute. You know, some areas of Argyll and Bute are very, very far away from Inverness, and obviously with our pathways to Glasgow, that creates a totally different dynamic. But that then led me on to this broader question. So you've said that we'll probably get, a final report next year, and my question is about how do we take that forward and embed that work? Thinking back to what we were talking about in the culture programme, you know, we need to choose our priorities, choose where we spend our resource, and also look at how we embed things as part of our business as usual to make sure that it's not just a small select group of people trying to affect this massive cultural change, but that we do it throughout the organisation. So how do we take this excellent opportunity to hear from an independent panel who've, you know, been privy to all this very important information? How do we take that learning and embed it? And as part of that, when we get that final report next year, will we, probably not the whole board, but will there be a small group of us that can perhaps have the opportunity to have a bit of a two-way with the panel and test some assumptions around those reports and sort of work with them to figure out the best way to embed the recommendations? Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. That sounds like a really good idea. Fiona?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that will be, we're actually meeting with the panel again in January, myself and Pam and Boyd, to sort of, we have a regular kind of check-in with them. So I think that's something that we can bring up there and suggest, because I think that I'm sure they would be willing to do that. They've been very willing to engage with us. I think in terms of how we overall take that report and even the outstanding actions from here, we have been giving that some thought, because I think whilst we have the culture programme and the culture programme dashboard, the next item's about the listening and learning survey outcomes and the iMatter outcomes, which again are a kind of subset of a similar theme. And I think our vision is that we ultimately bring together all of these things into that kind of managing those actions and making sure that they're kind of captured and picked up and tracked and reported on throughout the organisation. And I think that's something that as we go through the coming months, we can look at and bring into a bit more focus about exactly how we're going to do that. But I think it's really important, because as you say, there are additional, one of the excuse me, one of the things about the range of topics covered by the independent panel is that they are all still to do with our culture, but some of them are much more like the integration issues, or issues about finances and how we manage them. They're definitely more part of our business as usual, and I think that we can make sure that things are taken forward by the relevant areas, but my kind of view would be that we still continue to track those until they're completed in one place, so that we can make sure we don't miss anything I think the points you made about integration, I say it's something we can and do follow up with the panel as well on, in terms of making sure we understand what we're being told. But I think there's a range of things there about, kind of within Argyll and Bute, does everyone understand integration and what it is and what it isn't? Probably more importantly, sometimes because we have a different model in Highland to Argyll and Bute, actually that sometimes causes tensions because people don't understand why things need to be different. So I think there's definitely more kind of work to be done there to make sure everyone understands what it is and it isn't.
Thanks, Sarah and Fiona. Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Wade. Yeah, Fiona, building on what Sarah just said, looking at the recommendations, and the actual panel say that although there's 11 new recommendations, many of them are actually covering areas that they've already made recommendations in, and they're building on that work. So it looks to me, and they're probably doing this deliberately in the strategic way, of they're constantly refining and challenging and looking to see how we can use that to go forward. Have we got any plans beyond when we finish with an independent panel? Have we got any plans to continue to do that ourselves? Is there a way that we can build on what they've already done, bearing in mind that we're getting the final report next year, that doesn't just suddenly stop and we stick it on a shelf and we forget about it? How are we going to use it to build beyond that, to make sure that we've still got the opportunity, looking at those areas, to continue to improve, be it in short term, medium term, or long term?
Thanks, Alex, and it's a really good point. I think absolutely this is a huge opportunity for us. I think is see how we track and manage those actions is one thing, but we have all these other opportunities. Even once the panel itself has finished, we have the reports we get on a monthly basis from our Guardian service about people raising concerns and what sort of topics come through. That's all, key information for us to keep working on. I think our own listening and learning survey is potentially really important because actually we have control over what questions we ask and how we track that to be able to continue to measure areas where we want to understand whether or not things are getting better. So I think it's really important. I think one of the things that we will want to see when that report comes to us and when we've had a chance to discuss it is that proposal about how does this get taken forward, kind of, and how do we not lose that and be very clear, because this is it's a really important kind of set of information for us, and there are things there which it will take us years, not weeks or months, to actually kind of turn the progress on, so we will not want to kind of lose that.
Thanks, Alex. I'm Fiona. Graham Hardy.
Thanks, Fiona, for that's great. Just wondering, the recommendations, I think it mentions mental health and stigma, and I was wondering how NHS Highland as an employer will address the issue of mental illness and stigma, because often with employees, if they are, say, having a mental health bad day, then they'll phone up, but they won't say they're having a mental health bad day. They'll say, oh, my tummy's sore or something else. And there is a huge amount of stigma still in society. And I think, put our best foot forward, and we could really be a leader in reducing the stigma and being an employee who really appreciates and understands mental health issues. I'm just wondering how we're going to go about that. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Graham. And that's a really important point for us. And I think probably one of the few positives of COVID has been perhaps it has become a little bit more acceptable, and there is a bit more discussion with people about their mental health and how they are sort of feeling. That's just a very small step. I think a big part of our wellbeing strategy and approach needs to be in the mental health space, and about things like mental health first aid training for managers about how to support people, because it does need a bit of skill, but that's something we can provide people with the tools to do. I think the more we talk about it, we cover it quite a lot in our Wellbeing Wednesday emails as well. The more we talk about it, the more we make it okay. The report, I think it uses some quite good language in terms of talking about, putting mental health on the same par as physical health, and I think we have a huge opportunity to keep kind of making that message loud and clear to our employees, you know, and I think that is so important to us to be focusing on, because, you know, if we know that we, as you say, not only do we lose large amounts of kind of time to people when they have when they are experiencing challenges with their mental health, but actually if they're reluctant in talking about it with their colleagues and managers, they can end up getting quite isolated, and actually we want to be able to kind of wrap that support around them, and support them to be at work with their mental health challenges where they can, with the right support, because we know that's better for them. So definitely a big priority for us as part of that wellbeing strategy.
Thanks, Fiona. Thank you.
Thanks, and bring this item to a close. Just to answer Alex's point about how we gather information beyond the healing panel, and you mentioned the Guardian service, Fiona, there's also the whistleblowing role that Bert fulfills for us, the independent role, and his visits to parts of the service. And I know, Alex, that he's planning to visit your own area early in the new year and meet with staff from the front line in Caithness and Inverness and other parts of North Highland. So just in summary, I think the healing process, these reports, organisational learning are really valuable for us, very useful reflection of the issues that have been brought to their attention, which they are now bringing to our attention. Some of it's repeat businesses where there are new items as well in this report. And it's encouraging and heartening to see the progress that we have made in addressing the first two reports. And we will continue to strive to meet the recommendations in this third report as well. We're just being asked to discuss it and note this report at this juncture. So we can move on now to item 11 and allow Fiona to hog the conversation even more with iMatter and listening and learning surveys and assurance report, which gives moderate assurance, and ask Fiona to speak to that.
Yes, thanks, and you'll be pleased to know that I'm conscious that I'm the barrier between kind of this and lunch, so I will try not to be too long. I think just in terms of in this report, we've got a summary of our listening and learning survey, which was the NHS Highland survey that we carried out in June and July this year using our Culture Amp platform, and also about the national iMatter survey that was carried out in August and September this year. And for that listening and learning survey, that was the first time we ran it. So the idea is that it gives a baseline for future surveys to be compared against. This report that you're seeing here was also presented to Staff Governance Committee and is, as before, in the new assurance template. And what we're proposing here is an assurance level of moderate, reflecting good progress made, but noting that we're working on the action tracking being in place in order that we can provide more substantial assurance. And I think it also reflects the ongoing impact of systems pressures on our colleagues and the need to balance pushing forward with actions and the ability for colleagues to be able to benefit from them. So in the pack, you've got two reports from iMatter for the whole of NHS Highland and a third that is a high-level summary of the NHS Scotland data. In terms of who completed these surveys, we had a 51% response rate for iMatter 2021 compared to 56% nationally, so not too different. Both of these are a bit lower than past years, which kind of reflects the fact of the pressures that we were working under. I think typically NHS Highland would sit around the 59-60% completion and NHS Scotland around 65%. We did have a lower level of uptake around our own listening and learning survey, which was about 42%. NHS Highland is very similar to the rest of the NHS in Scotland in terms of the iMatter results. Our engagement score, for example, is 73 compared to 75 nationally. Our listening and learning engagement score overall was lower, but actually that measures a wider range of elements than iMatter, and so isn't comparable. But what is interesting is that many of the elements picked up in both surveys are consistent. So for iMatter, our four highest scoring areas are the same as they have been in past years, around direct line managers being approachable, about them caring about colleagues' well-being, and about people having confidence and trust in their direct line managers. That's really encouraging to hear. And our colleagues are also clear about their roles and responsibilities. And again, all of these elements were strong features of the listening and learning survey. The four lowest scoring areas in Highland are identical to the rest of NHS Scotland and are the same as past years as they have been across Scotland. So performance management, involvement in decision making, trust and confidence in leadership, and the board member visibility. And again, those are similar themes that came through in listening and learning. There's also very little difference to past iMatter results in Highland in 2021, and that is again a trend replicated against Scotland. And that in itself is interesting, given the sustained and unprecedented pressures that our services and colleagues are under across the country. And I think this is where the additional value of our listening and learning survey comes in, because iMatter has a very structured set of questions and there isn't any detail sitting below them. With listening and learning, we can cut the data in different ways, so by job, family and location, as well as by team, department, division. And those do show some differences. iMatter only reports on team structures and how they roll up. The other huge benefit from our listening and learning survey is those 16,000 comments we received, and we continue to analyse and theme them and look at them to give us specific guidance on particular areas, because it's almost more important to understand why someone gave a particular response than just the response that they gave. And what the comments have shown us so far is that actually, if you took at face value the question that someone responded to, you may not well connect it to the issues that they're then describing in the narrative. So we're continuing to use the insights within our work streams of the culture programme and within our leadership teams to ensure that we are addressing the issues being raised as well as the survey results. We're also working with teams or areas that had particularly positive or negative kind of results in surveys. And that's all about learning what's working well. So it's really important that we reflect that actually overall lots of people have a very positive experience, and there are some teams working under huge pressure who are reporting really, really strong scores. We need to look at what they're doing and understand how we can share that good practice, as well as being able to identify hotspots where people might need some more support. We're proposing that tracking of our organisational level actions will become part of that culture programme dashboard. And again, that's all about keeping this visible and monitored. And a lot of these things that are coming out of the survey are in the same areas that we've already talked about today. You'll see that one of our ongoing actions is our listening and learning visits to listen to our colleagues, and we're joining those up in the coming months with our wider engagement visits on the strategy development. So we'll be covering both, so that we have the opportunity to talk to colleagues about their experience and input to the strategy, as well as to our wider communities. And we've got a programme of visits lined up across Highland and Argyll and Bute in December and January. So I'm off to Caithness next week and Oban the week after, for example, and it'll be great to get out there and meet with our colleagues in communities and really listen to what they want to tell us. We've already mentioned that Bert Donald, our whistleblowing non-exec, has made visits to key locations just at the beginning of this month. He was in Dunoon, Fort William, Mull and Oban, and got some really helpful insights and feedback whilst meeting with a huge range of colleagues. And these meetings and sessions are so important, because our colleagues will be really honest with us about both the positive things they experience and the things that they want us to work on. And hearing that directly helps us maybe get over some of that kind of challenge we sometimes have in such a big organisation of actually hearing what it is our people want to tell us. Finally, in a hot off the press update, the Listening and Learning Partner Survey has been developed now in consultation with key stakeholders and will run from the 6th of December to mid-January. So this survey is how we'll hear from those who work directly with us but aren't employed by us. And it's all about how they experience NHS Highland and how we can improve things as well as what we do well. We've got quite an extended timing period because in consultation with the different groups of colleagues who might participate in that, some, like our GP colleagues, felt December was quite a helpful time for them to have some capacity to support that, whereas some of our colleagues in social care, for example, actually felt January would be slightly better. So we'll continue to actively promote it, but I think it was really important to us to develop both the survey itself and how and when we roll it out with the people who will be answering that. And we'll propose to repeat that survey probably annually, because obviously the important thing around any survey is what we then do with the results and how we track whether or not what we do is making a difference. So that was all I was going to cover in that session. I'll hand back to Boyd.
Thank you, Fiona. And we'll open it up for questions. Yeah, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Boyd. Yeah, thanks, Fiona. In terms of the participation, just over 50% on face value, you would think isn't particularly good, but it seems to be a stubborn number. We never seem to be able to get very much better than that. Is that because of a communication issue, or is it just that we're not giving people the time, or is it just human nature and human behaviour? Have we thought about how we can improve that? Because clearly we're making important decisions on, what 47% or whatever the number was, haven't actually contributed to. And then the other bit was the bit that did worry me a little bit. At the end of page 3, or whatever the number is in the composite bit, some of the patients-facing units within acute community in Argyll and Bute also identified health and wellbeing and help and support from other teams a low-scoring area. Have we tried to get to the bottom of why they think that? Is that just because of the pressure they are under, or is there other more things at play in that one? Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. So in terms of the participation, I think it does depend on what kind of organisation I think that you're in. Typically, organisations that are quite kind of office-based, and therefore people are constantly kind of accessing computers and kind of responding to emails, tend to have tend to be able to get 70-80% participation rates. I think actually quite often if you talk to talk to some people, anything above 30% of a survey of this kind is actually regarded as sort of statistically valid, because it does take people to see it, to read it, to act on it. And I think our frontline colleagues particularly, however they are, whether that's in a ward or in a hospital setting or out in the community, they have limited time to be at, to be receiving these surveys and at a computer, and they might look at it and think, well, do that and then get back to it. I think some of the ways that you can increase participation is about good local communications from not just centrally but from managers. But it's a really delicate one, because what's really important is that people fill the survey out because they feel a level of trust and confidence that what they put in the survey will be acted on and acknowledged, which is what we're working really hard on. Because actually, I've worked in some organisations in the private sector where actually the compliance is, it becomes almost like a, manager saying, I want my team to have 95% compliance, and actually then you're not getting the value out of the survey, because people are completing it because it's a task to be done, not because they want to tell us honestly what their experience is. So it's definitely one, I think, particularly with our own listening and learning survey, the more we do it, and the more people, if we manage to really deliver on some of these actions that we've agreed, more people will trust it, more people will see that it's actually, this is about being at work, it's not about culture, or something that applies to other people who've had problems or challenges. This is about, we want to know how it feels to work here and what more we can do with it. I've now written down your second question and can't read my own handwriting. Alex, just remind me what it is.
It was about the comment at the bottom of page, the page about the patient-facing units, the health, the well-being, but more importantly, that they feel they're not getting the help and support from the other teams there. That was a little bit disconcerting when I read that.
Yeah, and it is. There's a range of probably different things in different settings. It's that one of the things that some of the comments from the listening and learning survey sort of told us was that there can be some challenges perceived between the hospital and the community settings and the relative priority, and obviously some of our performance measures and stuff focus much more on the acute hospital setting. So there's definitely an element of that, and how we make sure that we're working as a whole system. I think there can be also, we've heard sorry, we've heard that in some teams, corporate support teams, for example, who run processes that people find quite annoying, can feel that teams feel we're not supporting them, or vice versa. But we are looking into that.
I think Fiona was wanting to come in possibly because of a reference to our Gavin Butte there. Is that right, Fiona?
Yes, thanks, Chair. And I think it's also just picking up maybe a point from a previous question, is that I just think it's worth the board noting that this listening and learning survey was the first time in Argyll and Bute that the option to participate was opened up to our council employed staff within the HSCP. And so that's required of us to maybe think a bit differently about how we respond to what we've heard back, both in terms of how we ensure that we've got the synergy with the wider culture programme we've been discussing today within NHS Highland, and making sure that we are aligned and benefiting from all of the energy and work that you've heard described in some detail today, but also making sure that the council are assured that staff that are employed by them within the HSCP also have an opportunity to shape and describe the future of the culture programme within the HSCP. So we've changed our local culture group, the chairing of that. I've taken that on personally. We've looked at the terms and reference. We're working through the action plan. And so, Alex, the question you're asking then about how we're making analysis of the results in Argyll and Bute and how we're interpreting what that means, really we're in the process of doing that, of ensuring that within our culture group, we've got representatives from right across the workforce in Argyll and Bute, because I think it's only by doing that that we can try and make sense of what those answers mean in our context in a way that's meaningful to how we then take forward change. So I just wanted to add that, really. Thank you.
Happy with that, Alex? Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thanks. But Fiona, I didn't mean to make you cough all like that.
I must have ran out of my allotted time of talking without coughing there, so that must mean I'm coming to a natural end.
Okay, I think we're all needing our lunch break. Just before we do break up, I think on the level of uptake of these surveys, Alex, there was only 1 year that I can remember, 2 years ago, I think it was over 60%, which was the magic number to generate a report. I suspect that the ongoing pandemic situation has affected the degree of uptake in both of the surveys, the listening and learning one and the iMatter one. I think we have to be careful that we don't ask too much of people in surveys, and that given that iMatter is biennial, maybe our own internal listening and learning survey should be in the other year, every other year as well, so that they don't clash as they overlapped this year. We're just being asked to take moderate assurance from this report. Are you happy so to do? Okay, and I believe in elite Edinburgh circles, they say you'll have had your tea when you go to visit. I'm not suggesting that you'll have had your lunch, but I think we should break now and take a Can we come back at 25 to 2? So reduces the time to about 23 minutes or something like that. 25 to 2.